All right. So, hello, everyone, and welcome back to another episode of Pretty Powerful Conversations. I want to thank all of you for joining me tonight. And this has been a doozy of a day for me and my host. But hey, we are still here. We showed up, and we are ready to give you guys a great conversation. Today we are going to have I think, a much needed discussion about how the conversation, the language of DEI is changing. And like with any paradigm, we're going to see some shifts that take place along the way. So, and we're going to get into what I've been seeing and what I've been hearing, because my guests and I have actually been having some great conversations off of social media.
Yeah.
And so I was like, Charles, we need to bring this conversation to the masses. We need to bring
Yeah.
this to the people, because I think this is something that is much needed and might be why we're not seeing the progress that we have hoped to see in DEI. Might be one of the reasons that that's not taking place. So, my name is Dr. Kiriazi. For those of you who don't know me, I am a DEI professional. In addition to an employee empowerment coach, I help y'all get it together, get out of those toxic workspaces, and find the employer that you need, the career that you need, or possibly even the business that you should be in. Now I'm going to allow my guest to introduce himself, because I think he's going to do a much better job than I will. So, Charles, take it away.
So my name is Charles M. Harper Sr. Currently, I'm the Diversity and Inclusion Manager for My Health, My Resources of Tarrant County. That's located in Fort Worth, Texas, where we do amazing work in mental health, substance abuse, and just the list goes on. And I'm incredibly humbled to work there. And I'm an author of 4 books, starting back in, I think, 2011, 2010. Freemasonry, Black and White, a follow-up of A Spurious State of Confusion, a fiction book, Screaming into the Light, and my current book, and I can see it over my shoulder here on the shelf, Between You and Me, a guide or a pathway to interpersonal inclusion. And this is where we begun speaking and exploring that dynamic. And I definitely appreciate you having a copy of the book. So I appreciate that.
Yes. And actually, it was, first we had the conversation, but then when I got a copy of your book, I was just like, yeah. Then we had some more conversations, and I was like, definitely we need to have this, not just between the two of us, but we need to include some other people as well. So,
Yeah.
with both of us being DEI professionals, and some of our conversations have centered around psychological safety
Definitely.
and language.
Yes.
And I think what I have seen, and you can always correct me if I'm wrong, is that what I've seen is that there has been a lot of blaming. There's been a lot of isolation, and not a lot of inclusion. I always say that I see everyone focusing on the diversity in DEI,
Yeah. Yeah.
but I don't see people really focusing on the equity, the E, nor the I, the inclusion. And I think those two really center around the language, but also the understanding. Because the other thing that I'm seeing is that a lot of people are centering DEI only around race, like it's a black
Yes.
or white issue,
Yes.
which again becomes a language
Becomes
thing.
a language issue.
And I see DEI differently. Now, I know some people gonna come for me.
Let them come. Let them come.
On my edges.
I think I sent you a pan with some eggs.
You did. You sent me that meme.
Yeah.
I should have sent you one with somebody having their edges snatched.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
I do see race, but I also see all of these other issues and isms and
Sure.
biases that are intersections
Yeah,
that take
absolutely.
place that
Absolutely.
that also make up the whole landscape of diversity, equity, and inclusion
Right.
that I don't hear a lot of in the conversation, except if they're coming from those individuals.
Absolutely.
So I hear the LGBTQ community, their version of diversity, equity, and inclusion. Then I hear those with disabilities, but then the disabilities are divided because you have your physical disabilities and you have your mental health disabilities.
Absolutely.
They're
Right.
disabilities too. But then we have women, but then we have Black women, we have Asian women, we have Native American women, we have, Pan Pacific women. Like we just it's all it's these subcategories that we have.
Absolutely.
And
Absolutely.
so you and I, we've had the conversation about how a lot of people are feeling excluded
Right.
in these conversations, but they should be included.
And that's so when I think about inclusion, right? What I think about is and this is something that we teach, our new employees and staff at MHMR Tarrant County is what should inclusion look and feel like?
Hmm.
Not just are we including a diverse array of individuals whose immutable differences separate who they are, but the ideologies, right? So if I say inclusion, for me, I started to see, well, if I say I wanted it, let's say let's race is always the biggest issue. Let's say I wanted to. I'm a CEO of a company, and I'm looking at my board, and I say to my board, we don't have enough diversity on our board. We don't have any. We don't have any Black women. We don't have any Native Americans. We don't have any people with disabilities. So we're going to bring those people, and we're going to ensure that those people have a seat at the table. That's not inclusion. Having a seat at the table.
Right.
Inclusion am I is my thoughts and my feelings sought out? Are my contributions being actively sought out? Are they a part of the collaborative process to whatever this issue is? And does my contribution manifest in the outcome?
Right.
That is inclusion.
Hmm.
And I think that when we talk about language, I think for a large part, there's really only qualitative data in theory that even supports, and that's another conversation for another show, but there is not enough data to prove that the diversity itself is producing actual inclusion. We can say a company has this many historically marginalized individuals. We have this many LGBTQ plus. We have this many disabled. We have this many of these all these traditionally excluded groups. We can say we have those numbers, but what is the evidence that inclusion is actually occurring? And so that's what I wanted to look at. And so when I was an undergrad in my cultural anthropology track, one my capstone project was literally I wanted to understand what are the barriers, because let me just backtrack. My background is having a Black father, white mother, South Side of Chicago. I suffered from ACEs, adverse childhood experiences, and so out of all of that, I was trying to figure out what stops us from being able to communicate with one another. And I looked at my own family structure. So fast forward, I was in Bolivia and did this study. I wanted to understand what allows an individual to be receptive of what I have to say. And so the indigenous in Bolivia, I put them in two separate groups, and they were the missionaries had already introduced them to Christianity. So what I wanted to understand is, would they be open to understanding what Islam is? And I took two approaches. On the
Okay.
one approach with the one group, I just introduced Islam. The other group, I spoke about Jesus Christ first. I explained how Jesus Christ appears in Islam. And from there, the conversations were endless. When I initially introduced Islam, they were completely unreceptive. In fact, some of them got emotionally troubled by the introduction. So what was the linchpin between both of these groups? What was the connectivity? What allowed one group to go forward in the discussion and what stopped? It was the approach in the language. I connected with Jesus Christ being a prophet in Islam and that he's the Messiah in Christianity. And so when I connected in that capacity, they were willing to learn.
So what you did was you really met them where they were
Equity.
in their
I
beliefs.
met them where they were. And that brings us to what we're going through now. And I have to say, I was inspired by Dr. King's last book, Dr. Martin Luther King's Jr.'s last book, Where Do We Go From Here? And particularly when he was explaining to the Black Panther Party about the tagline of Black Power. And he explained that we understand what that means as Black people. We understand Black power is seeking equity and justice. We understand that. But for those who do not understand Black culture, the oppression, and this is after 1964 when the world thought that the race problem had been resolved, he said they're not going to be receptive of that because they don't understand that. And it came to fruition because you have the FBI getting involved, the politics ensued, and regardless of what you think of the motive of the political agendas at the time, they were still imprisoned by their cultural isolation from Black culture. And so I think about today in our approach, and I started out just like I see everyone else doing. I walked into these areas and I'm going to teach you about Black suffrage. I'm going to teach you what my culture went through. And when I get done with it, you're going to have empathy and you're going to shift your mindset, and, the rainbows will appear and doves will fly, but the problem with that is that moment of empathy is not sustainable. It's not sustainable, and it doesn't invoke actual tangible results, statistical results that go on. And so I started at that point. I started to take a different approach to what I did with diversity, equity, inclusion.
And I'm actually about to segue into this, and I want to say, Dr. Harper, this was a very good example, Dr. Harper. She said one of the most popular questions that she gets from her clients, and from white men, and they will ask, how are they included when it comes to their role in DEI, and they just don't feel like they are included in the endeavor and think that they should just be silent.
That's a good one.
You and I have actually talked about this, so thank you, Dr. Harper, for bringing this up, because this was actually where I was about to head into. And kind of what you were saying as well, Charles, is that what we see, especially what Dr. King was trying to point out to us, was really about the language and how we might understand certain things, and also the perspective, but other cultures may not understand. And so, like, we are not fluent in being a Hispanic. And so we're all different in different ways. But the role of DEI, or the goal of DEI, is that everyone should feel included. And so I'm gonna get biblical on y'all for a second. I ain't that deep, but it reminds me of Pentecostal, where everybody just came together and they understood what was being said, but they all spoke different languages. And before they came in, you didn't understand the different languages. But when they
Absolutely.
came to that assembly, everyone was heard the same thing, no matter what language they spoke. And
Yes.
for me, I think that is the goal of DEI. And so, as Dr. Harper pointed out, we do have these white leaders, white male leaders, who are feeling excluded from the conversation. And
Absolutely.
you and I have we actually talked about an article where the DEI person was basically, it was like it's the white man fault and the white
It's
man
the
this
white
and the
man's
white
fault.
man
Yeah.
that,
Yeah.
and that was the most pro black article that I was just kind of like, okay.
And let's go back just a little bit. Right. So employee resource groups, right? The affinity groups. And in fact, I think that was one of the article that we were speaking. There was the white males felt excluded, and they wanted their own employee resource group.
Mm-hmm.
And so here, so DEI historically started with the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission and affirmative action. Historically,
Right.
right? You come to the 1980s with deregulation. The name of the EEO officer starts to shift to a diversity manager, right? But this vehicle is still an affirmative action vehicle at the time, and partly and rightly so. The transition from desegregation still hadn't completed, and in some areas still hasn't until well into the 90s. So rightly so. But this transition, once you get to a place where the laws are starting to catch up with the culture, that DEI, instead of being the affirmative action vehicle, now should have shifted into the bridge between Title VII and EEOC.
Mm-hmm.
It should have shifted into that bridge, but it really
Yeah.
didn't. It really didn't, because it was now sought as a new form of a vehicle where we could, in some ways, guilt or leverage inclusion to happen.
Right.
And it's like Professor Bill Walton from Columbia University said. He said, for example, saying the words white privilege or even white supremacist. These are not new terms. They're terms to to incite a reaction to create leverage. Same thing as when people used to call other people racist, and then they had names before that. And so the DEI vehicle has not matured. It just simply transformed into a different coating, but the interior was still the same thing. And my point is that, I almost had to ask myself, are we afraid that if we say that there is advancement, then we relinquish the leverage of guilt, hoping for empathy? Because if I say everyone is included, that means I have to collaborate on a resolve that incorporates everybody. And if I'm creating employee resource groups, right? And here goes the white man. If I'm making these employee resource affinity groups, who doesn't have one? The majority that still, not necessarily entirely their fault, are in this position of the major influence. So now they're still outside the group, and you have a separatism from the white majority, again, quote unquote, in all the marginalized communities.
Well, I guess where I am at on this is that I understand infinity groups. I get all of that. But I think at some point we have to stop segregating ourselves with
Exactly.
within these companies, within these circumstances and situations. At some point we all have to sit at the table. And we have to start having these uncomfortable conversations. Like we have to become comfortable having uncomfortable conversations. Hence why I'm doing these types of discussions.
Yes,
Because the pink elephant is still in the room, pirouetting on the boardroom table. Why? And no one is talking about it. And so I had a great conversation today where we talked about um, with diversity, every the what companies are kind of doing, what we're seeing is that they're doing the bare minimum. So if they are taken to court,
absolutely.
they're not going to be sued. That the person is going to lose that lawsuit
Yes,
if it's
yes,
based on bias. So if they
yes.
can prove that they have taken some type of initiative, they're covered in a court of law.
We try.
But we have to go a step further. And I think it needs to
Absolutely.
go beyond making sure companies are protected in a court of law and shifting the perspective, changing the language to return on investment.
Hmm.
If my employees keep quitting, then that means I have to spend more money to train new people to come in. That's costing me
Yeah,
money.
yeah.
And that
71
might cost me the same as if y'all took me to court and sued me for being biased. So why don't I just fix the bias problem?
300, $385 billion is wasted on average every year in conversations to resolve conflict. And what initiates the conflict is communication. Either
Mm-hmm.
we're fearful of what to say because there was a Harvard Business Review published a Harvard study that said that they were, and this is in 2016, they were doing diversity and inclusion trainings, and they were explaining to the staff the financial loss as a result of not fitting the part, not saying the right words. And so
Mm-hmm.
again, I had to step back and say, part of that is that what they were learning, they could not apply in their personal life. So
Mm-hmm.
now we're coming to work with masks, and they have to work in masks, and now no one is actually seeing each other. So inclusion can't happen, and then that is not sustainable. So I backed all the way out of it, and I said, well, what prohibits us from communicating? And I went back to my research. What prohibits us most often from communicating, outside of being shy or whatever, is the fear factor.
Yes. Yes.
Fear.
Yes.
So
Yes.
now that tells us that we have to go beyond being coming to the DEI field with just a history knowledge and sociology knowledge and even human resources knowledge. Now we have to go psychological and neurological, because
Mm.
at the primal state of being human, our unconscious mind is protecting us, and that protection, the amygdala can't detect whether we are being attacked by words or fists, right?
Okay.
So
Mm-hmm.
now when I go back to say, well, inclusion means I have to include all, and we can create procedures. MHMR uses a steering committee, which we ask for volunteers from all over the agency, and everyone from our executive leadership team to residential trainers, peer supervisors are on that, and we tackle issues, and everybody throws their titles away, and we collaborate until we resolve it. But again, we can't do that without interpersonal communication. So
Which is
we
key.
we start with EQ, emotional intelligence.
Emotional intelligence.
I'm
Yes.
gonna I'm gonna own my accountability in the conversation by saying, I'm gonna recognize that I have an emotion. I'm gonna recognize that I need to be aware of it. I need to manage it, and I have to be accountable to everyone else because of my emotion. That's one.
Mm-hmm.
Two, we don't use cultural competency in cultural intelligence, because those two studies, um, they feed our unconscious bias by making us feel confident that because I see you and I studied your general culture, that I know you, and that excludes the intersectionality part of it. So we express cultural humility. I see you, but I don't know you until you teach me who you are.
Mm-hmm.
So now,
Which what I'm also hearing is you're also creating that safe space. So the
there we go.
psychological safety.
And that's the next step. And with both of those, we are creating that cycle because we are a trauma-informed agency, not just with our clients, but with each other. So now I am the safe space.
And Dr. Harper wanted you to touch on that about the trauma-informed versus the guilt-informed. And so, and I think you're doing a great job of that. So, Dr. Harper, are we covering it? Did we get it? Because she had been put this up, and I was
Dr. Harper hits me up. I call him a cousin.
Yeah, well, okay, your cousin. This is what Cousin Harper said.
Yeah.
Okay, and she makes a good point that, and I've heard this a lot, and this is the conversation you and I have had as well. Is that we see a lot of the guilt framing that's taking place from DEI practitioners, and so my concern has really been, okay, if we are doing the guilt trip, as I'm gonna call it, y'all call it the guilt trip, okay? So we guilt tripping, and I also call it the blaming.
Oh,
I see a lot of that taking place, and it's being referenced as this is DEI. Again, going back to the white man this, the white man that, and so, but then it's just like, well, wait, pause, because you've already alienated them before you stepped into the room.
Before you walked into the room.
So you haven't even walked into the room yet, but now the fear factor has set in before you've entered the room.
Yes.
Fear is already there.
They already have anxiety.
They got anxiety. So now you're trying to say this is a safe space, and they just looking like, no, it's not.
No,
Why?
it's not. I mean, think about it. If let's reframe it in a different context. If my father tells me you're going to get a whooping when you get home,
why?
Right? What am I sitting in that back seat thinking the whole time?
I'm thinking a lot of things, but it is not going to be I'm safe. I'm
not safe. The anxiety. So we know for a fact that psychologically, once anxiety is induced, the ability to critically think diminishes, right?
Right, exactly.
So if I induce anxiety into that room, and I know that their critical thinking abilities are diminished, and I'm coming in there bringing logic built on my passion for wanting inclusion, what really is learned and was there? That's why, in my personal opinion, that's why we're still stuck at we need to have the conversation. I'm past the conversation. I'm going into the room, and we're going to have a resolve when we walk out, because I'm going to be very empathetic. Wow. I had an individual once who was the descendant of Stonewall Jackson. And this is back when I was doing, I'm going to teach you about Black folks, right? And we were talking about the N-word. And this person, I mean, he looked like Father Time. He had the cane and everything. And by the end of the conversation, it's a room full of white men. At the end of the conversation, he says, I'm over 90 years old. I'm a descendant of Stonewall Jackson. And I've used the N-word my entire life because that's what I was taught. Mm-hmm. It's not until this moment that I now understand that's a negative word. Mm-hmm. What if I had come into the room saying, I'm going to teach you about white privilege and white supremacy and white this, and you're going to have to accept your white guilt, and we're going to talk about white fragility. One, nobody's going to hear me. They're going to sit there, and those that are open-minded, and biologically, some of us are more liberal, some of us more conservative, based, a whole bunch of stuff, but the size of that amygdala comes into play again, right?
Right.
And then what about who else is included in that conversation? You were talking about it earlier. Now, my individuals in all those marginalized communities, they never even enter the discussion.
Mm-hmm.
They never even entered it because the whole time we're talking about black and white. Now, that's not to say that there aren't issues there. There's obviously issues there.
Mm-hmm.
But are we in the Reconstruction era? Are we in the Jim Crow era? You know, we're not post-racial, but we're definitely not. And that's more of a Booker T. Washington more than a W.E.B. Du Bois kind of perception on it.
Yeah.
But we're not where we were.
Yeah.
So if we're not where we were, how can I continue to use the same emotional approach to the problem?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
That didn't make sense to me.
Yeah.
And partly because my complexion, I get to black father, white mother, I get to definitely, walk in both worlds. I don't choose to, I choose to be black, but I get to hear, I get to experience. And so if my frat brothers send me into a restaurant because they believe I'll get a table quicker than them, but I'm black, was it my white privilege? Do I have to accept my white privilege? Or was it their implicit bias, of which is no fault of their own? Does it then make them racist?
Mm-hmm.
No. And I can't prove any of that, even if I wanted to believe it. So that's where I said, I have to write this down, and I have to demonstrate that the approach to whatever we do, and I hear it now, they have to accept. They have to accept. They don't have to do a damn thing.
Right.
They don't have
but
to.
I also think when you come from that place of, well, you have to accept this, then I feel like you're trying to force your beliefs onto them, which again, that becomes the whole isolation.
Absolutely.
That takes away the space that's supposed to be a safe space, because you're coming in again, you're basing it off of fear.
I was just at Tarleton State University talking about this, giving a lecture, and we were talking about what does it mean to really provide a safe space. If I'm going to say you are human and I expect you to err, then how can I then be upset when you misspeak and then place a label on you?
Mm-hmm.
You'll never learn what that microaggression, slip of the tongue, you'll never learn how that offended me, because I'm going to jump on you. You're going to get defensive. And now one of us is headed out the door of this company.
Mm-hmm.
One of us is leaving at that point. It may not be for 6 weeks, 6 months, but one of us is on the way out, and I'm bringing somebody with me because I'm going to tell them what you said.
Right.
Safe space.
So we've created division, we've created animosity, we've created hostility, and what you went in there to do, you didn't
accomplish at all.
didn't read the room. You didn't accomplish anything at all. As I used to say in as a college professor, you didn't read the room. So because sometimes you can read the room, and when you walk in and be like, "Ooh, okay, they are not receptive."
Today is not the day.
Of me and my big hair, I'm gonna need to take a different approach.
Yeah.
Like I just see a lot of people jumping in, and it's again, Dr. Harper said we have the anti-racism DEI, and I understand the anti-racism, but I think when you are looking in the context of DEI, and we're going into, again, corporations and organizations and even communities, we have to understand again that it's not just about race. That it's not just about race, that everyone isn't angry, that some people truly just I don't understand. So instead of you trying to force your ideologies on me, why don't you listen to where I'm coming from, like my perspective? And Dr. Harper said it best, where she has worked with like the guys, the white men, and they were saying that, well, they had these beliefs, because that's what they were taught.
That's
So
what
it
they
was
were taught.
passed down from one generation to the next, and it
And
happened.
I have to be empathetic to that.
Right. Because that's a part of being a DEI practitioner is that there has to be a level of empathy. And I see
Absolutely.
some people miss that boat. I hear it in their writings. I hear it in their videos. I hear it in their conversations. And I always in the back of my mind, I'm saying, you're so angry, and I understand your anger.
Absolutely.
So I'm not dismissing their anger.
Completely valid.
I
Completely
get
valid
it.
emotions.
I
Yes.
get it. I
Yes.
get it. But I think you have to understand your place in DEI. And sometimes everyone is not the right person to go in and do the training, especially when you have maybe like you're working with a board of directors and they're all white heterosexual males who graduated from Ivy League colleges and they come from old money.
It's a different language.
That language is
Yeah.
going to be totally different. And you have to understand how to speak their language to get them to understand the message that you need
Yes.
to get across to them. The language they understand is return on investment.
ROIs.
ROI. They don't
Yeah.
care about who granddaddy did
Yeah.
to who. How does this help us to make more money? The investment that we're about to put into this, where are we going to see
Yeah.
our returns? But if you're doing a good job at diversity, equity, and inclusion, so you focusing on all the letters, not just
The whole
T,
time.
the whole time,
Whole time.
it can be measured. And so the other thing that I'm hearing is that in these trainings, that like you're saying, people walking out they mad, so no
Mhm.
data is being collected.
Yes. Yes.
But then you got some people, they may stay, but the data they're going to give you might
It's
not be,
skewed.
which is skewed because
Yeah.
again, they might be feeling a certain way based on how all of this went. And so it might more so be a critique of what you came in and how you made them feel versus what they got from everything. And so then
Yeah.
I feel that when that happens, you have done DEI a disservice because
You've undermined the effort. For me, doing DEI work means I have to work on myself every day. Whenever I speak to a room, I use culture of humility first. I'm checking my bias. I'm saying things such as, and I'm very outspoken with it. I'll say, yes, my ancestors were enslaved. Yes, Jewish people have trauma. I have trauma from that. Generational epigenetics, so have you. Jewish people suffered the Holocaust, they have trauma. Irish people came here during the potato famine and were treated horrifically from the immigrants that were already here. There's trauma. And I said, so what I would not like to do is play whose trauma is greater. Our bodies, our brains, when we experience trauma, I can't say your emotion is different. Happy is happy. Sad is sad. Trauma is trauma. Now the impact on me as an individual from my trauma may be different variations, but It's still trauma.
It's still trauma.
So I'm not going to compete with your trauma. We're going to approach this in level set and say that, everybody has experienced trauma. Even if we want to cast it into the realm of saying an Ivy Leaguer heterosexual male, best believe there's trauma there.
Mm-hmm.
There's trauma there.
There's probably some family trauma that's there.
Oh, and simply because they are that, I can't walk into that room and presume that they're only interested in the returns on their investments.
Right.
So that's where the cultural humility, and I just think, if you haven't done that work, I don't know how you can then walk into the room and say, let me lead you to where we're going to be a more inclusive place where we know that's the benefit of diversity. The inclusion is the diversity, diverse ideologies. So, and then I have to bring that all into the center, and we have to speak. And that's where empathy, emotional intelligence, checking my implicit bias. There was a TED talk, and I always repeat this. She said implicit bias is not limited to immutable differences. She says, I had an implicit bias against polka dot dresses. Every day, every morning before work, I listen to every news station. I listen to Fox, MSNBC, CNN. I listen to every single one for about 20 minutes. And when my wife is off, she can't stand it. I got to go into another room. So I listen to it all, and she says, oh, I can't do it. And so what I do the entire time, though, is I pick out the person that I respect, whose knowledge I respect the most, who I know is credible. And when I hear the things, I ask, if that person was saying it, what would be my response? And I check those biases so I can try to filter. And then at the same time, I validate all of that because those are their feelings. That's valid. Those are their views. That's valid.
That's valid.
I can't, if I force you to change it, it's almost as if breaking somebody's will by a beating. But then once I remove the disciplinary measure, they're going to go right back to their default. I want their default to be open and receptive.
Right. But you have to, again, like you said, you have to create that space. But in creating that space, that means you got to start within. You have to do your own work, and you have to check your own biases. And, again, if you about that DEI life, all right, y'all, if you really about that life, this is part of the work.
You want that DEI life?
Yeah, you gotta check yourself, I do it all the time, and I say,
it's hard.
And it's hard. Like, but guess what? I'm like, if I can check myself and get myself together, that makes me better equipped to go into a room and to create the space that I know that they need to be open, not just with me as a facilitator, but with each other. Because I think learning is a collective effort.
It's a collective. It's a give and take. Every time I teach, I learn in that session.
And we should be learning as we are facilitating. A good teacher learns from their students.
Absolutely. You got to have a growth mindset.
You have to.
That internal work is, the louder voices that are in our craft are valid. It's completely valid, but I think we also have to remember that we can't force our will, our ideology onto others. So we can't say, and I know some people may feel, I think that some people may feel that, and here we go, because race sucks the oxygen out the room, the white man doesn't need a safe space. If your perception is that they don't, I think you've already failed. Because they're human.
They're human.
I'm human.
First. They're human. Everybody in the room is human.
It's human first.
And so everyone still needs the safe space to learn.
Yes.
And if the space is not safe, and I learned this from working in higher education, working at a HBCU, where I would sometimes have students who were not Black, and so it was just,
and they're marginalized.
And they marginalized. And I would have to make sure that the space that they were in, that we all learned and we all grew, but that we all respected each other in that space. And so my thing was, what you do outside of this classroom, that's on you. But when you're here, I don't care what color you are, what country you're from, what hood you from. We are all the same, and we're all going to learn from each other. So I set that tone from the get go. If the disrespect started, I wasn't going to sit there and allow the student to have to defend themselves. I would step in, but in my stepping in, let me make this a teachable moment. What can we learn from this? So no one's feeling bad. Let's learn from this so you won't do this outside of my classroom.
I remember I was teaching U.S. history in a high school, and it was a mostly Hispanic population. And in this class, and we made it a safe space. And a student asked me, a Hispanic student said, Harper, I didn't let them call me Mister. That's a historical thing. He said, why is it bad for me to say the N-word? And he said it in front of everybody, including an administrator. And so we had the conversation. And the administrator came to me and she said, this is unbelievable that student felt that safe to ask you that question in this setting. And I said, well, if we don't have safe spaces to have this dialogue, if it even needs to get to that point, because I honestly believe that if we focused more on the emotional intelligence, cultural humility, and intercultural communication, how do I enter this conversation with the most optimum frame for an outcome, then it may not even get to the race, the necessary disability. They might be able to just say, hey, I feel excluded because of this. And we can have that dialogue and find out it has nothing to do with race. It had to do with the smell of your breath. You didn't take a bath today. It might be something completely out of your mind. But so, I'm getting ready to do some consulting, and I won't say the state that I'm doing it for, but it's not in the continental United States. And their issue is that white businesses, LGBTQ businesses, are excluded. And they're trying to figure out how to include them because they want to bring those resources in. Mm-hmm. So I asked myself, if we're not thinking, if we're slowly focused on the thing, the made up construct of race, and it being made up from the outset of it, if we only focus on that which is not really real, only because we believe it real, then how do we move forward with anything tangible?
I gotta read some of these comments because they having a whole discussion over here. They include our discussion, but they having a whole different discussion too. Michelle said the trauma is real for sure. Toxic masculinity is for real. And she also made another comment.
Toxic masculinity.
Dr. Harper. Yeah, Dr. Harper had a good one. She said, how would you advise people who are interested in doing trauma-informed DEI approach with cultural humility? And I think you kind of touched on this some, but if we have some people in the DEI space who are right now saying, oh, I might be doing some of this wrong, like, how can they start to shift their perspective and looking at it from that trauma-informed versus the guilt-informed? Yes. How can they shift to more compassion and everyone is a human being informed when they're going into these spaces, but creating that safe space that is needed to see the change that we're all hoping for? Absolutely. What might be like some resources that you would tell them to pick up besides your book?
Because it's in there.
Yeah, tell them what your book is now, so they go grab a copy.
Let me build to that. So, toxic masculinity. Is it real? Absolutely. We are in a patriarchal society, which reinforces. So we can say, well, white is reinforced, we could say masculinity is reinforced. Those things are embedded in the culture. So how do we approach that? It's still a trauma-informed approach. So one of the things I would say is the National Council, I think it's the National Council of Well-Being, is one place that individuals can go to learn more about what trauma-informed is. And then what you want to do is develop, and the only reason I put this book out, it's a program book. It's not like a novel or anything like that. It's a path to say, using a trauma-informed approach, psychologically safe environment. Here is a pathway that we can follow. And my hope is that individuals get the book and create their own pathway, because it's different for, anyone who says that they can just walk into a company and do DEI. I think that's ill-advised, because each company has their own culture with their own needs in that. And until you learn the culture of the company, it's really hard to actually develop any kind of policies.
And the thing is that DEI should not be cookie cutter.
It is not. It is a long.
So don't go in there with these cookie cutters, y'all are more from the Dollar Tree, thinking you about to change a whole company.
Yes.
They might need the Betty Crocker ones that you have to go and order off Amazon. Like everybody is.
Yes.
Everyone is different.
My chief, Thomas Bledsoe, he says, him, and I give the company I work for now, the agency, a lot of credit, because they had a lot of strategic things in place. And so all I had to do was really come in and pick it up and, start to move things. And one of the things they say, that it's a journey, and almost like Simon Sinek says, it's an infinite game. There is no end game to this, because once we resolve an era, a gap here, that worldview trend is going to shift, and then there's going to be another gap, and then another gap, and then another gap.
And people are saying, what's the name of your book?
It is entitled "Between Me and You: A Path to Interpersonal Inclusion."
Y'all got that? Say it again, Charles, because I think they're trying to go order a copy.
Oh, and that's great, and
it's on Amazon.
And we've seen this approach work in Dallas County. We use it for Judge Shakita Kelly in her criminal court, working with her Interceptor program. We used it for those individuals with a lot of success. It's been used for the Tarrant area food bank. And again, it's a non-confrontational approach.
And it's a guide, really.
It's a guide.
It's a guide.
Not the solution, it's a guide.
It's a guide.
And there's no solution. There's nothing that you can go and say, go do this, and it'll be successful.
And the solution comes from working with the individuals within the company and within the.
Absolutely.
Why I keep saying it's not cookie cutter, because those individuals are different individually, but collectively they are different as well.
Absolutely.
Their solutions to their unique problems within their work culture are going to be totally different than the business that's down the hall in a whole different suite. You're absolutely right. When we think about culture is not the whole organization. Culture might be this department. And that department is fine, but this department needs a little push here or there. They may need an extra little policy or they might need
like
some
that.
tweaking. Yeah, so you might have people sitting in this meeting like, we're fine, but you need to talk that side of the room over there. They got issues in their department, and so again, this is where you have to put your preconceived notions behind you when you walk into the room. You as a facilitator have to start with a clean slate. So you can't go in there saying, it's going to be like this, and this. Because again, I believe in energy. Your energy is walking into that room. They're feeling it. They put up their wall. And because they're like, you're not even trying to understand where we're coming from, what our issues are. So if you're not trying to listen, and you're not trying actively listen, and you're not trying to be compassionate, and you're not trying to create a safe space, but you're coming in hostile, why am I supposed to open up to you again? Because I'm just gonna sit here and drink my water and mind my business until you finish up with this, and I can, like, I done signed in, and I marked that I came, I sat, I
tell
saw.
You, when I see trainings called anti-racism trainings, I go, first of all, there are only certain people are even going to be receptive to it, and then everyone else is going to tune out. They're going to, you're going to, when you watch the nonverbals and the quietness, there's nothing happening there. And what happens 3 months when you come back in 3 months to get your data? What are they going to put down? Like you say, you know, most of this work is qualitative anyway. And right. So when you go get your data, for the
those
people who do answer
it, talking about you.
When they're just going to check those boxes and I'm done. Did you get any real data?
No.
No.
And so then it becomes DEI doesn't work.
DEI doesn't work.
And that's what we do not need moving into 2022, is that we have to remember that words matter, spaces matter, how we enter those spaces as a facilitator matters. Absolutely. That the language is changing, and so the language cannot continue to just be based around anti-racism, and we're going in with the guilt trip, and we're going to lead with fear. That there has to be some changes that are made if we want to truly see not just the diversity, but the equity and the inclusion take place, and all of them work together.
I'll give you some data. You want some data real quick?
What's some data before we wrap up?
Before we wrap up, real quick, did you know that in the last report from the EEOC, there are more solid cases for disability discrimination than racial discrimination?
Yes.
And I spoke with an individual who had done legal work in EEOC for more than 20 years, apply for jobs doing diversity and inclusion with a severe physical disability. And the interviewers would ask them, what do you feel that gives you the right to even sit in a DE&I chair? I had the same face.
We got some work to do.
We got some work to do.
Yeah. So, Charles, tell everyone where they can find you on the World Wide Web.
All right. Well, I'm literally everywhere: Facebook, LinkedIn, by my name, Charles M. Harper Sr. I'm working with Found Away Foundation right here in Duncanville, DeSoto, Texas, and we are literally on April 2nd doing a live demo of the book, and we'll have live audience for interaction, and we'll also broadcast it. So if you follow me on social media, the free, and the first 15 people I think that registered got a free book out of the deal anyway. So you can find me anywhere. The book is available on Amazon, and there's a workbook that goes with it. And just shout out to my frat, Phi Beta Sigma, my chapter, Iota Mu Sigma, who supported me doing this venture. In fact, my line brother wrote the foreword of the book. And so check out the book. It's about the inclusive we. And I just want everybody to connect as human rather than see each other as tribal.
Yes. And y'all, if you are a practitioner, it is a great guide. It has pictures. It's in black and white and color. So he spent some money.
That's why the book costs $19.14.
It's got some color, because I was like, oh, this has color. Okay, all right then. Yeah. So, but it is a great. Again, you can use it as a guide, as a tool, as a resource to the work that you are doing. great place to start is there. Charles is easy to talk to. I forgot how we start talking via LinkedIn, but it has something to do with DEI. And next thing I know, we were on the phone. We done did email. We done did text messages about just different things that we see. Different, like, just conversations that we have heard.
It's not about being right.
Yeah, and it's not about being right, because sometimes we'll say, well, am I wrong? Like, check me if I'm wrong.
Yeah,
like, am I wrong?
Because I could be.
So we hold each other accountable.
Absolutely.
And that's why I was just like, I think other people need to be in on some of the conversations that you and I have when it comes to the work that we do in DEI, but what we've also seen being done wrong and being shared on social media. And so I'm going to leave you guys with this, that just because you hear it on social media, do your own research. You know, if it makes you feel uncomfortable, imagine how it's going to make those that you are walking into a room and trying to change the paradigm, shift that paradigm. So be mindful that, again, we're working with human beings. And when you walk into the room, sometimes some things have to be left outside of the door, and you truly have to walk in with a clean slate. And a clean slate starts with you.
Absolutely.
You got to be neutral minded, neutral spirit, neutral heart. You be mad when you walk back out the door, but when you're in the room, you've got to take into consideration those people that have been entrusted into your care for however long, and your goal is to get the job done. And sometimes that means you got to check your attitude, your unconscious biases, your feelings at the door. You got to do your own self-work first before you walk into these spaces. And I can definitely tell you, if y'all still walking in the spaces talking about the white man this and the white man that,
it hasn't worked in 400 years. We
ain't got nowhere all this time. That approach is not working. And so then we have to sit back and say, what does work?
What does work? Does work? I walk into this work knowing that it's a privilege what I do.
Yes. Because guess what? They don't have to let any of us into these spaces.
Absolutely not.
And it doesn't matter if you're Black, white, Hispanic, Asian, Pacific. No, they don't have to let none of us walk into their spaces. But they're giving us that privilege. So that's a privilege for us. Yeah. What we do with it is up to us. And the results that we get are reflective of us and the work that we do. So just some parting words. But I just want to say thank you, Charles, for joining us tonight. Again, if you all have not grabbed a copy of his book, make sure you grab a copy of his book, Between Me and You, Interpersonal Inclusion.
Yes, because it starts right here between me and you.
Get it right. Oh.
Yeah, you got it right.
It starts right here between us. Now, look, y'all, if you are not on my text list, I'm going to need you to text diversity to 74121. Text the whole word diversity to 74121. You'll get alerts on when the next Pretty Powerful Conversation is going live here on LinkedIn. I'll also let you all know about different things that I'm doing, just stuff that I hear about that's in the DEI community, resources. I do not spam people. I don't have the bandwidth to spam y'all. I don't have the time to spam people. So I'm basically going to give you what you need and I'm going to move on. I'm not trying to blow up your text messages every day, because I about forgot to send one out tonight saying I was doing this one. So that's how you can make sure that you stay informed of all the stuff that I'm doing. To learn more about me, I invite you to visit my website, drkiriazi.com. There you can learn about all the work that I'm doing in DEI. Check out some of the articles, some of them controversial, that I have written over the past year. And if you like to...
a little bit.
Just a little bit,
That's a
yeah.
little bit.
Like one of them kind of went viral and it's going viral again. So yeah.
All right.
But that's how you can check out myself and all of the different things that I'm doing in the DEI space and also the empowerment space as well. So I won't be on next Thursday, but catch me in 2 weeks and I'll be back with a new guest and a new topic. But again, I want to thank all of you for joining us tonight, being a part of this pretty powerful conversation, and we will see you next time.